So, hello everyone. Hello. So, welcome to the penultimate colloquium of the semester, and we're excited to have Carla Ribeiro present. And we're also excited and honored to have the very distinguished João Felipe Gonçalves introduce her. He is her mentor. He's professor on the faculty of the University of São Paulo, where he teaches in the Department of Anthropology and in the graduate program in social anthropology. And his current research includes the analysis of Cuba's ties with Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe, the history of Caribbean social thought, and anthropological practices on the peripheries of the world system of discipline. So please welcome Professor Gonçalves, who's on the screen.
I was muted, sorry. Thank you all very much. Thanks, Krishna, for the kind words, and many thanks, especially to the Hutchins Center for the opportunity to introduce Carla Ribeiro to you. As you just heard, she's a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology of the University of São Paulo, working under my supervision, and she's working towards an innovative and exciting dissertation on African and Afro-diasporic tourism in Dakar, Senegal. It is a real pleasure to me to introduce this brilliant young scholar to you, not only because of her own academic talents and accomplishments, which are obvious and undeniable, but also for what she represents in terms of the recent history and the hopeful future of racial and intellectual developments here in Brazil. If she is at the Hutchins Center today, it is because she had the capacity and courage to take advantage of the affirmative actions in higher education and the affirmation of Black consciousness that developed in Brazil in the last 2 decades. Also, Carla has had an inherently mobile trajectory in her education. Before coming to the University of São Paulo, she studied in 2 major federal universities in 2 different Brazilian states, and she's now in the Boston area working on a dissertation on West Africa. This may seem as not particularly remarkable for people based in the United States, but I want to emphasize how unique such trajectory is in Latin America, where racism tends to operate to a large extent in terms of creating immobility for people of African descent. So Carla's accomplishments are particularly important for that regard as well. Just like the people she's studying in Dakar, she's a very cosmopolitan, brave Black woman who's embracing the world. So that's another reason why it's a pleasure to give her the word. So this is Carla Ribeiro.
Thank you so much. It's really kind, and it's an honor to have my mentor and advisor to introduce myself. And I'm glad that you all are here. And I'd like to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation for the exceptional efforts of the Hutchins Center staff, whose dedication is evident in the organization of these remarkable colloquiums, and Professor Gaze, along with Dr. Krishna Lewis and Dr. Abby Wolf, who's unfortunately not here, but she told me in advance, and I appreciate that. So they have been incredibly generous, and it's an honor to be part of the Hutchins Center family of fellows, and I extend my gratitude to all my cohort of fellows, this brilliant cohort of fellows, and for these inspirational moments we share. And I'd like to also extend my appreciation to the audience here, both online and the ones who are present. So at this moment of my research, after having conducted 3 months of ethnographic research in Dakar, Senegal, I saw myself at a crossroads of potential starts for this colloquium. I have so much to say about Dakar and so many impressions I'd like to share with you that I'm certain to have a dissertation worth topic, which is a relief, right, in this 3rd year of my PhD. So I chose to bring up to you a fractal view of the Black tourists I found while I was in Senegal. This whole research is named Implied Pasts, Desired Futures, African and Afro-diasporic Tourists in Dakar. But to be fair to the topic of this presentation, I'm calling it a fractal view of Black tourism in Dakar. Here I chose to speak more about the tourists whose point of departure was somewhere in the American continent, the whole continent. But in my dissertation, I shall apply the fractality to understand interactions among tourists coming from different parts of the globe. Fractality is a feature that is commonly found in nature. And while I talk about fractality and the fractal view, I'll show you a little bit of location for those who would like to situate themselves on where is Dakar. So fractality is a feature that is commonly found in nature, and its applicability ranges from computer graphics and algorithms to medicine, economics, and geography. In geometry, fractals materialize as figures that unfold, revealing self-similar patterns. In other words, these figures are self-referent, but not in a static manner. I first came across the applicability of the fractal complexity to social sciences when I read a study of Susan Gall, a professor at the University of Chicago. She was working on the fractal distinctions between the notions of public versus private. This is not a dual distinction, she was arguing, but rather they are interactional and dependable of reference points. Here's the car, but what I would like to show you is the fractal, right? So fractals are complex geometric shapes. They basically show unlimited faces of similar patterns that are not the same, but they look like they are. The ensemble presents a shape, while the sum of its parts show a distinct image. As you can see here, this is the inner part of a kiwi, and you can see it whirls and whirls and whirls until it gets the final shape of the fruit. The mathematician Ron English demonstrates how these self-organizing patterns are widely present in several African countries today, in urban design, material culture, and divination techniques. And here you can see an image of the application and the urban design in Cameroon. But how do these patterns are possibly connected to Black tourists I study? Well, I'm glad you asked, but and I believe I can drive you there safely if we start with the genealogy of my research, which is also about a little bit about genealogy. It all started as an inquiry about the experience of tourists visiting the island of Gorée. Here is the island of Gorée, an iconic place that carries different meanings for locals and tourists. A World Heritage Site recognized by the UNESCO in 1978, inserted in the public history of the Atlantic slave trade. It is equally a place that gathers Black tourists to mourn the separation and the alienation of the slave trade, as it is a spot where the local population goes to the beach for leisure and pleasure. And here's the distance between the shore, the Dakar shore, and the island, to the island of Gorée. Though the heritage sites and public memorialization of the history of the slave trade in West Africa is a fascinating topic, and a whole research itself, the Black tourists traveling to Dakar to reconcile with their history and the unknown part of their genealogy are only a small part of the tourists in the city. They are from what is called in Senegal the historic diaspora. It didn't take me too long in Senegal to realize the island of Gorée was only one among the attractions, and that the Black tourists that I was interested in couldn't be considered as the sole diaspora. I arrived with a limited understanding of what the African diaspora entailed. It was only upon engaging with Senegalese tourism workers, as well as friends who supported my research, that I gained a more nuanced perspective, revealing the diverse nature of diasporas within Senegal. People would ponder, which diaspora was I referring to, the historic or the ongoing diaspora? So while Africa is recognized for its immigration patterns, there tends to be an oversight regarding internal migration, which is a significant component of the ongoing diaspora. The 2020 Africa Migration Report highlights that the majority of the African population prefers to remain within the continent, challenging the notion that immigration is the sole narrative associated to the African migration. 3 reasons are identified for the distortion that characterizes the current narrative of African migration, and here you can find them. Most African migrants are not crossing oceans, but rather crossing land borders within Africa. B, 94% of African migration across oceans takes on a regular form. And C, most global migrants are not African. Africa accounts for 14% of the global migrant population, compared, for example, to 41% of Asia and 24% from Europe. So I also owe the reflection about the diversity of diasporas in Senegal to Dr. Hélène Kouachi, and I hope she's watching me either later or now, and I thank her. In this context, foreigners bearing multiple African nationalities are also attracted to visiting Dakar for diverse reasons, ranging from work, business, study, visits to family and friends, and so on. This perception reflects on the current shape of my research, which must take this form unless the scenario changes completely when I come back to Dakar next year. So the first 2 chapters will be centered in the material culture and heritage sites, basically these 3 most places that I will drive my attention to. And these places narrate and present the history to tourists, and the 3 other chapters that follow shall talk about the historic diaspora. This is the 4th, tourists departing from Europe, which includes immigrants and 2nd and 3rd generation immigrants. And the final one will be dedicated to the neighbors from West Africa and other countries within the African continent visiting the city. And I forgot to tell you, but the third chapter it is supposed to be about the tourist guides and the histories they also tell about their city and the places I'll study. So during this presentation, I aim to show you how such diversity has appeared to me in different shapes and colors. Yes, this means I intend to talk about the politics of race and racialization among Black people. In interviews and informal conversations with tourists, I found the sentiments of deep affiliation and long-standing connection in the voices of some of my interlocutors. I quote a moving example in the words of Vivian, which is a Brazilian professional dancer who is pursuing her master's degree in dance and was awarded a trip to Senegal to attend workshop sessions at a world-renowned dance school, which is called École des Sables. It's not so far from Dakar, and during her time in the country, the school organized an excursion to the island of Gorée, which you have seen. The previous picture is the view, the beach, where you arrive when you get the ferry. And here's the House of Slaves, or Maison des Esclaves, which is a place that evokes sentimental narratives about the Atlantic slave trade and its commemoration. I am not going to take too long here talking about the importance of the House of Slaves, the disagreements around historical accuracy, or on the background of narratives about the slave trade, but I should say that many scholars have approached this history of the house and its making into a major visiting site since the late 60s and 70s. And since I am interested in bringing the tourists' voices, I shall focus on the interview I had with Vivian when she came back to Brazil and she told me the way she felt about her trip to the island, which I have translated and quoted here. So just before I go to Vivian's quote, I would like to just mention that this is part of the narratives that the captives were kept here in these dungeons, in cells, and imprisoned before they were sent to the New World. So this is what Vivian told me about her experience in the island of Gorée. For me, this was my experience, right, of having returned to that place. I came back even though my ancestors had left there and were forbidden to return. I felt all of that, that mix of feelings at the same time, that indignation, that anger, the hatred. But in the end, that, I don't know if I can say joy, but that feeling of, oh, I managed to get here. A closing of the cycle of my ancestry. It's as if I have closed, an important cycle for my family, of those generations, of having returned to that place that, as far as I know, no one in my family had stepped on. Africa has long been a significant place of meaning for the historic diaspora, a sentiment explored by scholars such as Bayo Hosey and Saija Hartman, and their studies highlight the intense emotional connection that diasporic visitors, particularly those from the historic diaspora, often experience at memorialized sites linked to the African slave trade. For instance, returning voyages to Ghana, as discussed by Hosey and Hartman, evoke transgenerational emotions among diasporic visitors, triggered by the tangible aspects of the places they visit and shaped by national policies for public history. Céline Labrine-Badiane's work on Antilleans in Senegal adds another layer to this pursuit of the motherland. In her study, she delves into the mythical ideas of spiritual and physical return to Africa among Antilleans, influenced significantly by the Negritude movement from the 1950s to the 1970s. Labrine-Badiane noticed that after Senegal conquered independence, individuals from Guyana and the Antilles moved to the country with the aim of participating in its renaissance. The historical significance of Africa for the diaspora is not a recent concept. W.E.B. Du Bois himself moved to Ghana and passed away there in 1963 after being invited by President Kwame Nkrumah. I am sure you have a list of other eminent African Americans who moved to African countries in the same decade in your mind. For now, I want to highlight that the enduring nature of the diasporic ideas meets the active efforts of African states to attract the historic diaspora. These efforts are under continuous adaptation to historical contexts, local historical contexts, in both sides of the Atlantic. However, I must recognize that what I'm calling Pan-African tourism, and sometimes Pan-African tourists, I'm still working on this idea, which is the Black encounters around Black people's material culture, showed up to me as being in constant movement of fission and fusion, which is an anthropological, widely known for anthropologists, but maybe not for the larger audience. In Vivian's quote wasn't the sole tone I listened to in the discourses of local and Black tourists. As we should always remember, diversity among people of color is oftentimes homogenized due to political aspirations against racism. Still, it doesn't mean that our differences are not there. And what I hope to be able to show you is a portrait of how international tourism is a privileged lens to think of Black diversity and difference, and why Senegal is a great place to evoke such movements of fission and fusion. I lived in Dakar from March to May 2023, and during this time, one of the activities I am particularly proud of is the internship I took at the Museum of Black Civilizations, le Musée de Civilisation Noire. I'll keep on translating to French, and sorry if it sounds pedantic, but yeah. Over the course of the month, I had the opportunity to work closely with cultural mediators, a group of 4 women and 1 man. And I was entrusted to leading museum tours in both French and English after immersing myself in the museum's extensive collection. And this is as big as the museum is. It's a huge institution. And it was a special opportunity for me to learn from my colleagues, from the visitors, and also a nice strategic internship while I was there to interview people and see their reactions. However, an uncomfortable incident occurred in the walls of this museum. Although this episode saddens me, I feel compelled to share this experience because it led me to draw certain arguments and shape the thoughts that I now present to you. By going through this unpleasant situation, I show my vulnerability and expose myself a bit, which I consider is part of the anthropological work, exposure, allowing oneself to be affected, in the words of the anthropologist Jean Favre-Sada. I was affected, but what the fieldwork told me does not only concern me. Part of it concerns most of us in this room, and the other part should also concern us all equally. So we leave home to be treated in the same way here. It was a very busy day, as we had 2 large conferences happening at the same time in the museum. There were at least 200 people in the main hall looking for their conference rooms. My boss, Mohammed, who was also the curator of the museum, asked us to make sure that the conference participants did not enter the exhibition areas without paying for admission. Here I should mention that all the names that I cite from now on were changed due to my interlocutor's privacy. And Vivian was the exception because she asked me to keep her name. I was not very comfortable with this task as I am an introverted person and I don't like to confront people. But I had to do it, so I tried to be polite and apologetic. I asked many people to show me their tickets in different languages depending on where they came from. And I said something like, excuse me, your participation in the forum does not give you the right to visit the museum, so you must pay for admission. I'm really sorry. Some people were understanding and cooperative, while others were annoyed and angry. I tried to keep calm and professional, even if I faced some eventual rude reactions. Among the people I approached, there was a group of 3 black youngsters who were speaking in English with an American accent and taking pictures. I don't remember if I had asked for their tickets before because I had asked so many people that day. But I think they did not show me their tickets the first time. I must have asked them. And I let them go because I did not want to make a scene at the first time. I was not being watched by my boss or colleagues. I thought there was no big deal, if they just continued their visits and I continued my work. However, about 30 minutes later, I saw them again, taking more pictures and having fun. And this time I was talking to a colleague. She was doing the same task as me, and I was distracted. Without thinking twice, I approached them again and asked them to show me their tickets. And I did not even realize that I was repeating myself. One of the young women who had ignored me at the first time snapped at me and she said, "But you've already asked us." She was very angry and I felt like the tension rose up as she started to move around, complaining aloud, causing her friends to also be agitated. One of her friends tried to calm her down while the other one looked nervous and confused. I tried to explain that I just needed to see the tickets, but they could neither show me them nor explain to me why they would not. And at that moment, my co-worker Maria Mam, who is from Senegal, came to help me out. And she did not speak English, but she tried to talk to them in French. She told them that we were just following the rules and that we wanted to see their tickets. She asked me to translate to them what she just said, but still, we had no understanding. The young man raised his voice and stepped back, making the situation more tense. After what felt like a long time due to tension, maybe 2 or 3 minutes in reality, we finally found out that they had come to the museum with a tour guide who had paid for their admissions and kept their tickets outside. This is why they did not have their tickets with them. When we finally understood what happened, my colleague, Maria Ma, apologized to the group and to the guide, and when I tried to say anything, I heard from the young man, "We leave home to be treated the same way here." And then the group left, and I stayed there with my apologies and answers stuck in my throat. I know there are some possible ways to interpret this situation. You probably have your own thoughts. If you followed my speech well, you know that my interpretation was about race. I felt horrible. I felt like I triggered episodes of racial aggression in that man, specifically in the group, the men specifically, in the group as a whole. They were all black. The sadness and anger in his voice told me so many stories of racial violence that are familiar to me as well, although in different proportions, I am sure. How many times have I asked myself, did race play part in this situation or that situation? How many times have I felt I was supposed to fit in a certain behavior to not be misinterpreted as a shoplifter or as a suspicious person? I still do sometimes, either here or in my home country. And I was painfully confronted once more by this ambiguity of my racial positionality in Dakar. The way I was perceived in Senegal was under constant negotiation. And what followed the scenes represents this negotiation even boldly. I wanted to say something back to the group, but I could not. I felt like suffocating in all the words I could have said. As I was standing there, I remembered something that had happened to me a few weeks before. When I had arrived at the museum for work, it was a normal morning, and I was walking to the entrance when I heard someone shout at me, "Tubab." So, Tubab is a word that superficially may mean white person or European in Wolof, which is the language most spoken in Senegal. And also, it's a word that is used in West Africa in general for the same purposes, but later on, if you want to me to discuss a little bit more about what is the meanings, possible meanings and expansions of Tubab. I would love that. I did not know who said that or why, but I got conflicted with everything I thought I knew about myself, and I recalled all the experiences I had in which I heard I was a Tubab before. It wasn't the first time. This is why it was something that marked me. It's not that in Brazil, my home country, I haven't had to face my racial ambiguity before. We are well known for being a melting pot, a mixed race country, which ultimately results in a system of color hierarchy, aka colorism, in which the dissimulation of markers related to blackness and the pursuit of those that are associated to whiteness are at play. I guess you are familiar with the system here as well. The idea of whiteness seems so promising for social and economic ascension that makes light-skinned people like me be taught that assimilating to whiteness is perhaps the only way to achieve respect, and who knows, if you are good enough, you may fit in the spaces of power. Well, as I left the room visibly vulnerable, I headed to our shared office where my colleague Adama was. She asked me what had happened, and I was surprised she found the case as being, pardon me, American arrogance. In her interpretation, the group found themselves as too important to be interrogated twice. Les Américains sont comme ça, Adama remarked. American people are like that. This made me realize she perceived his attitude based on nationality rather than race. Mariama entered the room and listened to our talk. When I explained that I felt sorrow because the situation had been interpreted as racism, they were both taken aback. Mariama expressed that if she had encountered Bois in the corridors, she would have labeled him a racist, emphasizing, just because Carla is a Tubab woman, he interpreted the situation as racism, implying that he was the one displaying a racist behavior. Adama visibly opposed Mariama's statement and countered, but Carla is not a Tubab, she's a métisse, mixed race. Look at her hair. Adama went on to say that had the situation occurred with any of them, African and Senegalese, the Americans wouldn't have perceived it as any act of racism. African Americans are like gays, she declared. They face so many instances of prejudice that they begin to see race and homophobia everywhere. So my 3 stars and my colleague James taught me to drink some water after 3 stars. So as I told you before, this is not only about me, this is not supposed to be about me only. Some people whom I met in the field who were working in the tourism industry used to say that places related to the history of slavery, touched African Americans in more intensity since their ancestors were the ones who were stolen from the continent. Indeed, accounts of resentment and aggressive behavior related to racial tension weren't rare in after-visit settings, both in literature and in my conversations with tourists and tourism workers. Hélène Kouachi brings up the voice of an African tourist who visited the House of Slaves among an interracial group. So I translated and I quote to you here as well. So the first time I heard the curator recount what had happened in that house, and in the house being the House of Slaves that I showed to you previously, I was shocked. When I came out of there, I couldn't do anything anymore. I had a kind of hatred towards the whites. It was impossible for me to swim later on at the beach with my friends. They were French. The second time, I was less affected, but it still shook me. Of course, today whites are not the same, but I wasn't well, it hurt me. A Congolese tourist who I interviewed at the museum told me the following about her experience at the island of Gorée and the House of Slaves. The island is a beautiful place if we don't consider its past. You must feel emotions strongly, right? Your forefathers and ancestors must have been stolen from here. It's like one of my relatives he was stolen to. These are the ways in which our pasts are implied, which accounts for collective pain and the attempt to pursue the history narrated in the first person. It is not a straightforward task because union is more of an aspiration rather than a concrete materiality. Also because the politics of racialization, which involves historicity, local and global, even within the Black diaspora's positionality does not work single-handedly. Neither does self-determination suffice itself. In that equation, we ought to consider nationality, gender, and class, and this is why I brought the example of the incident at the museum. It shows the complexity of the ideas of race, which is the fractality, among people of color. And Frantz Fanon went through this issue back and forth in Black Skins, White Masks. And I quote him here, "The black man has two dimensions, one of his fellows, the other one with the white man. A Negro behaves differently with a white man and with another Negro. That this self-division is a direct result of colonialist subjugation is beyond question." Neuza Souza Santos, a Brazilian psychiatrist, wrote in 1983 a seminar work about Black Brazilians in social ascension. She was deeply inspired by Frantz Fanon's reflection on the impact of mental health of Black people navigating mostly white environments, and how they tend to have a negative impact on Black people's mental health, and I'm repeating myself, sorry, to reproduce this social distinction within other Black groups in the same context. And then I quote her really quickly, because she quotes Fanon as well. So, in a Black person, the mark of difference, a red-hot iron that separates them from a white person, is experienced not only at the level of their external behavior. They repeat this inequality, introjected in their psychic universe, and when co-living with another Black person, they're similar. They reproduce the separation ritual in a caricature split that leads to what Fanon says, and then she repeats the same quote I just read to you, right? Black man has two dimensions, one with his fellows, the other one with another man. With a white man, sorry. So by interpreting the common history, this implied past, the common history of these implied pasts, we sometimes get trapped into chronotopes of colonialism, slavery, racial violence, but also of the independence of the African states, the African Renaissance, and beliefs in a Pan-African future. So the chronotope is a Bakhtinian concept, Mikhail Bakhtin, and it complements the notion of a certain place intricately tied to a specific moment in time and history. A chronotope is used for me as a concept. It was used by Bakhtin, and it is used to me as well for different purposes. Because Bakhtin proposed the concept to illustrate the inseparable fusion of time and space through which stories and experiences unfold in literature. Its applicability transpasses the literature domain, and it has also been used in social sciences, especially in the last decade. I explain a little bit about how chronotopes of colonial past permeated the perception of some Brazilian visitors I encountered in Dakar. Regardless of their self-identification as Afro-descendants or not, these Brazilians I met often expressed discomfort and hostility towards white European tourists in places where my research was conducted. By using Portuguese to conceal their comments, they questioned the presence of people they would vocally call colonizers. They would say things like, "This place is full of tubabs. What are these colonizers doing here?" When I asked them why they couldn't be there when we, as foreigners, were also present, they justified it by claiming to have greater legitimacy to be in Senegal because they were Brazilians. After all, they argued, they were closer to the Senegalese than the Europeans, since they had also been colonized by them. It was common for the same Brazilians to come from trips through Europe, since there are no direct flights between Brazil and Dakar. And they would normally choose to spend a few days visiting the Iberian capitals or Paris. What I inferred from this behavior, before from the literal layer of the explanation of these tourists, is that by choosing to be an uncanny destination for Brazilians, Senegal, they expected a kind of isolation of Senegal from the international community. This, intentionally, would give an aura of greater authenticity, legitimacy, right, to the country, and greater exclusivity to the destination. Therefore, in their stereotyped imagination, in post-colonial West Africa, there would only be dark-skinned Black Africans. The most interesting thing about this projection is that when I told my Senegalese interlocutors about this reaction, I heard comments like, Atubab is complaining that we only have Tubabs here. And in this way, the positionality shows the fractal figure that unfolds, revealing another image. A Brazilian tourist that declares himself or herself as Afro-descendant and is bothered by the presence of whites in the tourist attraction is read as a Tubab by a host. Again, it is worth noting self-declaration is not determinant. Race is relational, contextual, and therefore not static. Fractal distinctions also manifested in the field work in the form of multiple identities, denial of others, or ambiguity. One of these encounters occurred with a couple originally from Jamaica, both at around 60 years of age. The couple has been living in the Midwest of the USA for over 40 years now. We met at the African Renaissance Monument, which is this, which is this one, the African Renaissance Monument. And at the beginning of our conversation, in one of my early questions, the wife, Shirley, mentioned that this was the first tourist spot they were visiting in Dakar, as they had just come from the Gambia. When asked about their first impression, they told me, Senegal is modern. We didn't expect it to be so because the Gambia is not modern. There are hardly any buildings or roads. I then asked them what they thought about the representation of the statue, the family, and the idea of the African Renaissance. They compared it to the Statue of Liberty. It's a good representation and it speaks a lot about freedom, just like the statue. Shirley continued to eloquently speak without needing my intervention while her husband nodded in agreement. For this couple, such a comparison, the Statue of Liberty and the African Renaissance Monument, appeared only superficial. Shirley said in discontentment, we, Black and brown people, are not completely free. The impact of their visit led them to think about the recent colonial history in the region where they were visiting for the first time. They compared the situation in West Africa as part of the statues of Black and brown countries, which according to them again have never achieved complete freedom. The couple then began to consider the abuses of financial capital in the post-colonial era, as the husband, Sean, commented on Chinese money and the exploitation of natural resources, notably minerals in the non-free countries. Shirley told me that if she could choose, if she were truly free to do so, she would prefer to live in Jamaica or in a tropical country like Senegal. She would prefer not to have to sell her time to the West and live in a place with predominantly Black population, warm weather, and sunshine all year round. But as long as resources continue to be extracted and unfairly paid for, without being invested in the development of these countries, they would stay in the United States. They believe that they are resisting through traveling, so they travel whenever they can to majority Black population countries to, I quote, spend money in the country and support local businesses. So at one point, our conversation delved into migratory patterns, exploring how the oppressive extractivist system in global capitalism drives youth migration towards countries in the global north. This seems to have been the case for them as they immigrated to the United States while still young. Later on, Sean began to consider, look at Saudi Arabia, for instance. They don't leave much, and why? The resources they extract are paid for at a fair price. Look at Libya for another example. Gaddafi used the sources of income to develop the country. And then I close quote. Shirley and Shen did not explicitly invoke nationalism, but they vocalized admiration for a strong state capable of balancing extractivism with national developmentism. What else could this be but the manifestation of the utopian construction achievable for the freedom of these black and brown countries? The preliminary ethnographic data I present allow me to perceive that even within these confines of nationality classifications, there are distinct profiles related to class, gender, and political positioning, age, and even understanding of the meanings of diaspora. And the last example for me to wrap up, this is something that I can also verify by the example of Amy, an African-American tourist in her 30s. We met during her first day in Senegal, and she was exploring the country solo, having hired a tour guide to assist her throughout her trip. Navigating both urban and rural areas in Senegal can be challenging for foreigners, particularly if they not speak French, at least. It was her case. So initially, Amy expressed her curiosity as the driving force behind her visit to Senegal. While she was interested in learning about Black history, she emphasized that her trip was not solely focused on dwelling in the past. Interestingly, she mentioned that the concept of a return voyage was new to her. Amy arrived in Senegal during Ramadan, a sacred month for Muslims marked by fasting, prayer, and Quran study. The country is 98% Muslim. This period demands a strict decorum and adherence to a dress code, symbolizing atonement for sins. Amy confided in me at the beach, expressing her discomfort with judgmental looks she received due to her clothing. Despite understanding the significance of Ramadan in Senegal, where temperatures ranged from 27 to 33 degrees Celsius or 80 to 90 Fahrenheit during the dry season, she said she refused to wear long clothes. Many viewed her attire as a sign of privilege, of her distinctiveness as a foreigner. Throughout the entire afternoon we spent together, she shared with me at various moments the ways she experienced the difference, being a woman, traveling alone, searching for bars and nightclubs during Ramadan, her perception that people approached her with the interest in her money, and that she was constantly being overpriced because she was an American. Amy seemed to have a certain ambiguity regarding how she felt about this distinction. On one hand, she played along with male attention, seeking affectionate or sexual partners. On the other hand, she believed that some interests were limited to what she perceived as her financial power. So although I didn't inquire, Amy spontaneously shared her perspective on the distinction between African Americans and African immigrants in the United States. According to her, African immigrants often criticize African Americans, claiming they don't have to work as hard as they do and enjoy greater privileges. Amy disagreed with these assumptions, asserting, "I work overtime to afford what I want, but I buy my stuff at Shein. This top cost me $5. These glasses were $10. Everything I own comes from my hard work." And to finish, and I promise I'll finish now, the examples of fractal distinction that reveal interactions with Amy are representative of other brief conversations with different interlocutors in the field. In different extents, other tourists also have expressed how they were recognized for their differences, or how they distinguished themselves from Senegalese habits, customs, and places. It's worth noting that fractal differentiation didn't occur solely among African Americans. I intend to demonstrate in all the chapters of my dissertation how expressions of double consciousness also appear in tourists from other diasporas and Africans residing outside Dakar as well. And this is it. Oh, sorry.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm waiting to see if Professor Gonçalves will come on
Okay.
with the first questions or comments. Yeah, Professor Gonzalez, would you like to come on? Okay, we can begin with our audience.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. Would you like to comment or ask a question?
No, I'd like to hear what the audience has to say.
Okay,
Probably.
all right, great.
Well, thank you so much. This was really super interesting. As I traveled in the area myself, I had some scenes where I would say, wow, same observation. I have a question about the methodology in terms of your field work. I was wondering, because you talked about, different people, couples, whatever, different spaces, places where you met people. How did you actually organize that? Were you just hanging out and looking at people, or were you positioned at the point, when you showed us the door of no return, where you positioned yourself there and waiting for people to come and comment, or how did you do that? I was wondering what take you have on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I couldn't explain in further this methodology, but it's basically ethnography, which is bothering people when they are trying to have their good time. So I've chosen these 3 sites that I showed in the dissertation prospectus, which are the African Renaissance Monument, the whole island of Gorée, but also the Maison des Esclaves, and the 3rd one will be the museum. So these 3 months that I've been there, I was trying to see if these 3 places alone they would show as good places to talk with tourists, and this is why the internship was really valid, because I got to spend tons of time there working and also touring tourists around. And I basically used to spend to divide the weekdays, and I would go to spend 3 days in the museum, 2 days in the monument, and 1 day or 2 days, depending. I don't know. I think I oversized the weekdays here, but basically I would work a lot because it was only 3 days, 3 months. But I would share all those days, and with the museum was more complicated to conduct formal interviews. I could, when I wasn't touring tourists, I could stop them and ask them while they were resting. But tourists, they want to have fun. They don't want to talk much. They don't have much time. So this is something that I've been approaching as the mobile methods, which has been something that anthropologists in the field are talking about for some time now. So it's basically chasing them, going along with them, asking them to meet on the day after. So this tended to be really positive, and the results that I have in the in-depth interviews got like this, in this scheduling interviews or traveling with tourists and tagging along, being really annoying.
Carla,
Can I jump
thank you so
in?
much. That was extremely
Can
insightful and
you
nuanced
hear me?
analysis and very revealing.
Can I jump in? Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to add that this is Carla's preliminary field work. She's only spent 3 months there and she intends to come back for a longer period. So wanted to express my admiration for the amount of information that she was able to uh, uh, obtain in such a short time. That was just that small clarification.
You also have a great advisor, by the way.
Hey, they know
I
each
know
other.
him, yeah. So, what I was saying, that is very insightful, and I can relate to that because something similar happened in Cuba with tourists going to the island. I'm pretty sure everywhere in Latin America. So, just to get a material sense of what you're talking about, I want to know how much does it cost an average trip to Dakar, let's say for a week? I mean, I'm not saying if you're staying in a 5-star hotel, just a, like average cost of that journey, and how much does a regular Senegalese make, let's say in a year? What's the annual salary? Just to compare this person that was talking about her classes, $5 or whatever, like to compare the actual real difference that we are talking about here on the ground.
Well, thank you for the question. It's something that I'll not be able to give precise information, but I have an idea because the currency is something crazy, right? I was coming from Brazil with a Brazilian funding, so I had to convert my money to Brazilian reais, and when I was in the field, people would sometimes ask me if I had dollars or euros, and I don't. I have reais here. my currency doesn't help much. But I was told that at an average of $2,000, you can do a round trip from New York to Dakar, but only plane tickets. So it's not a non-expensive city. It's a really expensive city for those, especially for those who are perceived as tobabs or tourists or even non-white tourists. So the prices are really high for foreigners. And it happens for a reason, because most of the Senegalese economy is not formal. So in the country, it's used, the currency is just money only, cash only. So cards are widely non-accepted, and people make their monies, and the items are sold by small quantities. Even food you can buy in small quantities because people are always trying to make a living to survive that day. So it's hard to say how much would be the minimum wage for Senegalese people. And also I get a little lost in this currency, and it will be hard to state. But sometimes you can find some tickets on sale, and it could cost like $2,000 the whole trip, 5 days, for instance. So I think it depends a lot of the advancement of the purchase, and I really can't tell how much is a minimum wage in Senegal, because the conversion gets really crazy in my head. But you can have a picture by this description of how economy is not so formalized in this sense. I hope.
Yes, thank you so much. This is such a fascinating presentation and research, very rich. Kudos to you for putting yourself in the presentation and telling us your story. That was really fascinating. And I love the conceptualization of the fractal spaces and the changing positionality. My question is two parts. I'm curious about Black women memorials, obviously. The Renaissance statue, the African Renaissance statue, would you say that maybe that was considered one destination, or is it because there's the museum, there's the beach with the slave house and the statue that makes Dakar one of the destinations that Black tourists or people of African descent would go to Senegal to see. And then also, you kind of hinted at this in some of the interviews, but I was thinking about, is this considered a pilgrimage for people of African descent when they're going there, some kind of reconciliation or reclamation of their cultural heritage or ancestry? Is that a part of the reason that drives them to go to this particular destination as well?
Thank you for your question. And I most interested about this, about history as a source of pilgrimage, as trying to reconcile with this past. And of course, the island of Gorée is the main place that tourists would go to, travel to find this return. This is why the symbol of the door of no return, it's spread not throughout different countries in West Africa, not only in Dakar, in Senegal, but you can also find it, a door of no return in Benin, and also in Ghana and in Nigeria. So it's a phenomenon that was under construction from the 60s, since the independence of the African states, to the 80s, and after the a major crisis, right, that happened 20 years after the independence of the African states, right, the crisis, economic crisis that affected this newborn nations. You can see a difference in from this pursuit of pilgrimage. But also the tourism continued to happen, but in a different way because of the economic situation. But I would say that I decided, because I encountered only the Gorée Island and this as a single theme, a single purpose also for tourists to visit there. But when I got there, I heard there aren't only people from the historic diaspora, so the country is so much more. And the monument of the Renaissance, it's from this decade, right? It was inaugurated this decade. I'm counting here. Yeah, it was from this decade. So it's something that it tries to recite a little bit the tourism in the country, and also to keep on attracting the diasporas with an S, right? The plural diasporas, and try to memorialize in a different way. The museum also is something from this, it's a monument from this decade, and it shows how they want to not focus on the slave trade, not focus on the history of colonialism. Because over there, when you arrive at this museum, you will find a huge baobab statue built by a Haitian artist, and the theme is how ancient is life in the African continent, and how life was born in the African continent, human life. So it's fascinating how they still talk about colonialism and slave trade, but they don't want to be trapped in just single pilgrimage monotheme.
Thank you very much. A really nice presentation, Carla. Particularly the way you present race in its universality and particularity. So I really enjoy your presentation. Probably I would say two questions. The first one is, when you say Afro-diasporic, are you talking about African descendant people, or like diaspora in a sense of this understanding of diaspora, like me, for instance, I'm a diaspora. So are we talking about this, or kind of Afro-descendant tourists? So just to understand this. And you also mentioned about intersectionality in race, but I don't get, like, maybe it's my understanding. What's the understanding in local, particularly in African society, like gender, other factors, understanding race. Maybe in US or European context, yes, but like what's the significance of these factors in African society, like understanding of race in these things. Do I make my question clear?
Yes,
Thank you.
I think I got it. So basically, my main idea here is try to expand this notion of the diaspora, because I was also only thinking about the historic diaspora when I got there, and I thought, oh, I am from the diaspora as well, so I know what is the Black Atlantic. We are all from the same diaspora, but this actually only this side of the Atlantic here is the diaspora, right? The other side is the motherland. So this dual positionality was the only thing that I was seeing before I got to the place. Of course, I was aware of it by reading the scholars that were also discussing locally. But when I got there, it was surprising, even though I had this idea that diasporas are completely more plural than what I was envisioning. So you were considered from the diaspora as well, right? You are from Ethiopia. And also all the neighbors that were visiting. I've met people from Uganda, people from Kenya visiting, from Congo. So not only from West Africa, which the circulation tends to be easier for them. So this is why I met so many people from the countries, the Gambia, Cameroon, the Ivory Coast, but also from other parts. And also, the third is the ongoing diaspora, which is people who tend to migrate to global north, and they bring their kids that maybe weren't raised in a country, weren't raised in Africa at all. So they don't know what Africa, their parents talk about, even though if they live within this familiarity of the African culture and they eat African food within their communities when they migrate. So I was confronted with this diversity, and this is something that I really want to depict in the dissertation, to show that the diaspora is not only about us, it's not only about the pilgrimage site, it's not only about mourning this pain of separation. And also, something that was really another surprise to me, maybe because I'm really sometimes naive, but it was really surprising, was the politics of race over there for Senegalese people is completely different, right? Mm-hmm. So race is not something that they are totally open to discuss, because this is not what is important in African societies, I would say as a whole, but Senegalese in particular. So ethnic identity is more prominent. So when people meet each other there, they would ask, not immediately, but I've seen it a couple of times, people asking about their clans, their ethnic background, so where they came from. So this is more important within the African society. When you get there with these ideas of racism and how it operates in Latin America and here in North America, it's completely astonishing to most Senegalese people that I met. So what are you talking about, right? Race is completely an imported subject, let's say.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, and some of your stories, the fact that you were able to capture them so well, it's just amazing. I think I think this is a comment or a question. Maybe it's something that you discuss in the dissertation itself. Is the idea of tourism as a colonial project.
Can you come again, sorry?
Tourism as a colonial project. Mm-hmm. I mean, most of the stories that you were highlighting, to me, read like what I've read from the colonial adventurers who would come back or go back to their home countries and, tell the stories. So for me, what I think is interesting in your work is how this idea persists, right? And how ways of seeing change or not change, or are shifting or not shifting. And so I think it will be interesting to see how, because I think that's why your discussion with the Senegalese they had their own debates, their own ideas, but it's not the same as your perspective. And so I think, it matters maybe to look at how local people engage with the African and Afro-diasporic tourists versus how they maybe understood, how they dealt with the colonizer or the white person. I mean, we have the same word, tubab, we have mlungu, mzungu, and we also have those prices. Because you must pay up, right? It's the concept, it's the idea of you've come to see what, right? What have you come to see? And I think this matters. So if you've come to see, the wild animals and the people, then you must pay. So it's this kinds of ideas around like tourism and what local people still have around people coming to see. Because when we go somewhere, we're going to do something. So the difference, and I think this matters to try and see how the people who were taken away have come back to see us, right? Yeah, so I think maybe play around with these concepts to maybe problematize and our history or our understanding of how, stories change and shift, but they also stay the same. It's just the face changes. Yeah, I think that could be helpful.
Great commentary and ideas. You got me with lots of things on my mind right now, because Senegal is a country which its motto is Pays de la Teranga, which is the country of the Teranga. It's a Wolof word to describe hospitality, but it's not a good translation. I was talking with Dr. Kwashi, which is a scholar based in the University of Tehran Job, and she was showing me, when we are arguing from other scholars as well working, that Teranga doesn't mean hospitality. If you translate it, you translate it wrongly, because hospitality is it's well received, okay, and they do this, but they are expecting, it has to be in both ways. They're not just saying to you, come here, get my room and eat my food, but you have to pay for that, right? You have to pay somehow. And I've seen, as people would perceive me as not a tourist, but a researcher, a student, they would change completely the behavior, because it's not something that they were expecting. They realized they couldn't pay. So you can pay the other ways. You can pay helping and being with us, and we'll tell you stories, but you have to give something in return. So it's something that in anthropology we've been discussing for so many decades now. So people were talking about this trade and giving back, the reciprocity. So it's something that is really important there. And I know that if I start seeing the tourism as a new source of colonization, because there are some scholars who think the anthropology of tourism or in tourism studies that are saying that it's a new source of new colonialism, going back and exploring, taking pictures. And I see that it can be this way, but also I still have to think about if Black tourists are within this group of neocolonialism, because I'm not sure yet if I can put them within the same label as Senegalese people as well. I'm sure they have an idea towards what European tourists, white European tourists, why are they there for, and how they take advantage of the space and how they use the space, and how Black tourists are taking this space for themselves. And then when I say Black, it's the whole diasporas, right? So how the pilgrims, let's call them like this, from the historic diaspora go, and how they use the space, and how the other diasporas, the ongoing diaspora is there, what they are doing, what are they there for. they are also having their perceptions as foreigners, but not in the same way as this. I'm not sure if I can say that what happens in Senegal is neo-colonialism tourism, because I know the way Senegalese protect their space. So I think I see. I want to stick with the chronotopes of colonialism because it's operating constantly. This is why I brought the chronotope, because visiting such spots related to the history of the slave trade will bring up some ideas of how colonialism was operating. But for Senegalese people, I used to listen, what colonizers are you seeing here? There are no colonizers anymore. I haven't met colonizers. So the narratives are plural. And this is why I want to depict in the dissertation plural narratives towards this moment of their history.
Hi, so I have two questions. One is just a quick point of clarification. Could you return to one of your earlier slides where you listed the ABC?
Uh-huh. Yeah, thank you. I think I'm not being able to pull full screen one. But
that's okay. In the B, you used the language of regular migratory form, I think, and that's just my ignorance. I'm just wondering if you can clarify what that means. What is regular migratory form? And then my second question is to ask you to pull apart Toubab, because I'm interested in some of what Gavanza already mentioned. It's very much related. And to think about the extent to which that is as much a class term as it is a racialized term, right? Which class, but also in relationship to a certain kind of political economy as it's related to tourism, to nationality, et cetera. Because, you mentioned Saidiya Hartman, and the language that she wrestles with in that book is Obruni, right? In the Ghanaian context, stranger. And I'm interested in that lost intimacy as the marker of difference. It's lost intimacy, right? But then it is also in these other contexts, recognizing someone as likely or certainly from the global north versus the global south. It's very much a class question and categorization as well, right? The assumption of a certain wealth or status that is attached to the havingness of being from that place, that there is a monetary value that's attached to nationality as one circulates within the global south. So I'm wondering if you can kind of pull apart Toubab some more in thinking about it, not simply as something that might reference a racialized category of belonging, but one that is deeply intersectional and imbued with other kinds of class and assumptions of wealth.
Great questions, thank you. And first, these were the expressions that I took exactly from, this is an exact quote from the African Migration Report. And what they mean by regular form, it's not this image that we have, small boats and people coming in awful conditions and risking their lives. Of course, this happens. We're seeing in the media, in the news, but it's not what actually happens. People go through processes of legal migration and they take passports and they ask for refugee. So this is the regular form. They take planes. They go by cars crossing borders in the countries, and they don't need necessarily to cross the Mediterranean Sea to arrive in Europe. And really interesting question about the word to buy, and it's really relatable to what Saidiya Hartman encountered in a Bruni context. And I've recently found some studies about how second and third, no, not second and third, sorry, how immigrants that return, African immigrants from West Africa more particularly, Mali and Senegal as well, if I'm not mistaken, also from the Ivory Coast, a sample of this article was discussing, that they were called tubabs, but not, you became tubab. This was the name of the article. So you became tubab because their families were saying, if they don't want to give money, or if they can't support financially, and not just giving money, but if they are working in the global north and when they come back, they are not able to give anything to support for their families, they are seen as tubab. So yeah, you're becoming tubab. Why you're not? Or are you behaving as a Westerner? So there's this label as well. Not only economic, because I think, yes, we are seeing this perspective of tubab as the class differences, but I think the stereotype, even if it's a person that paid, it's from the global north, this African American tourist that I was mentioning, even if she paid in 10 installments, as we from Brazil, we travel, but we pay in 10, 12 installments, the things, and we go, they are considered as having more economic power. But I see a scale of how dollar is perceived as more valuable. So if you have only a few dollars, but you are American, you are going to be seen as perhaps more Westerner. And this is something that I'm doing freestyle here. I haven't thought about it. But I think there is a hierarchy of how you are perceived, not necessarily only attached to class, because they don't take longer to see, and Senegalese tourism workers and also other tourists, they assume you are wealthy if you are American. I think Brazilians were with me, were assuming you have your money worth 5 times mine, so of course I'm going to assume you are better than me, right? So I think there are these ideas, but 2 important things to note is the Western label, which is in the Senegalese society is really important. They mostly don't see themselves as Westerners. And the label of global and South, I think these are important markers. I think I answered everything, right?
My question is very related, so I'm not going to go through the long explanation up front. But upstairs we were discussing how national positionality kind of shifts the relationship to the narrative about this paradise or returning space. And you did kind of explore that in detail. What I'm concerned with also relates to Alexandra's question, but I'm thinking about, is the monument called the Reconciliation Monument? I'm sorry.
Monument of African Renaissance.
Renaissance, thank you, thank you. The Renaissance Monument, I'm concerned about considering the competing narratives about returning and like a type of colonial voyeurism, as well as the way that the country of Senegal is trying to shift away from that type of narrative. Who does that Black family represent? Does it represent different ethnicities within the Senegalese national framework? Does it represent returning African families? Or is it more aspirational and represents the Black families of Afrofutures? Mm-hmm. Like, what does that monument seem to represent in terms of Black familial identity? Because the structure is also very Western, right? And even in the United States, some of us are working to resist the notions of families in that way, right?
Wow, it's a really nice question. It also keeps me going to several places, but I'll give a short answer to what is going to come in my first and second chapters, because I want to historicize how these monuments and these places were built to towards tourism, and not only for tourism, how this is being also used by locals, and how the difference in the different diasporas, how they are using these places and narrating history to me, because I am approaching also the concept of anthropology of history, which is something that tends to be more interested in what people say about history than the sources, and look at the, of course I'm going to use archive historians, I will, but I'm going to listen to what people are, how they are narrating this history. And interestingly, the Monument of African Renaissance, it's not something that it's, now I think it's settled because it's a success, but it was really polemic in the early days. Before, it was supposed to be a partnership between the American government and the Senegalese government. It was supposed to be a statue of a family pointing to Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's something that I found in one of the sources. I still have to verify, but I think Louisiana, but I couldn't double check that. And then I know that it was supposed to point to the Atlantic Ocean as an idea of this is where we went to, and then the return. So lots of symbols towards this return, right? But then when the monument became real and finally it was funded, it was constructed by a North Korean company. And yeah, it's really crazy. This is why it's worth a chapter. It was built by a North Korean company, and the family tended to be seen as too naked to be Senegalese. So they said, where's the decorum here? So it doesn't represent us. Why are these people naked, right? So the population wasn't happy with the final design. And it also has the Soviet aesthetics, right? So it's something that has lots of things to discuss, I'm sure. But and then I think now it represents something, and people have different perspectives on what is it right now. But there were some people that told me, and just one person particularly, it was a white male, and he said, they are pointing to the ocean as if the only escape from here is out of here. So it's like what they are pointing to, they're pointing for immigration. So there are lots of narratives, right? So, and I think this is why it was a dissertation.
Yes. Can I jump in? Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. No, just a quick remark that the North Korean involvement in this monument is not surprising at all. There's a long tradition of North Korean investment in large monuments throughout Africa, especially. The biggest surprise is the fact that Senegal was never officially state socialist, but like the monument to Cuban solidarity in Addis Ababa, for instance, was also built by North Koreans. So there's a very long tradition of since the 70s of North Korean investment in large monumental complexes in Africa. And just this quick remark.
Thank you.
Will you take 2 more questions?
Yes,
Okay.
gladly.
I think your dissertation is going to be great. And I also think your delivery was fabulous.
Thank you.
And you raised some interesting issues. I have a couple of comments and a couple of questions. I think we're all tubobs when we go anywhere. We call it the foreigner tax in Egypt, even as archaeologists. It is what it is. But I was interested in some of your comment about these African American men and how they responded. I wonder if that was their first trip outside the U.S. And I wonder if that might not be something you might include in your questions, because I think people who are well-traveled tend to, just kind of roll with the punches for, whatever it's worth. And I also wondered what percentage of Senegal's economy was involved in tourism, and what percentage of the people in one way or another were involved in tourism. I just have no idea. And my third off-the-wall question is, what's in the museum?
Oh, good. Well,
as a museum person.
Right. Yeah, me too, as a museum studies bachelor's. I have a bachelor's degree in museum studies. This is why I chose the museum as well. Yeah, thanks for the questions. The first one about the reaction. Yes, I haven't thought about it this way, but I surely understood where it came from. I completely understood that they weren't stereotyped, as we were mentioning, right, in the answer that I gave about the idea of being Westerner, or receiving this label as a class label, a privileged class, and I wasn't seeing that as a group of people that are really used to, but of course it's just assumptions, and by just assuming that they weren't well traveled, let's say so, by only the first glimpse, because I couldn't have more information about them. So I can't really tell, but I'm not sure if I think I should consider more if this would make a difference or not. But it was a nice comment. And the second question before the museum was about
what percentage of the income of the country is involved in tourism, or people involved?
I don't have the exact number here right now, but I know it's a major source of income, especially because I mentioned this informality of the. Now, if I tell the numbers, it will be off, but it's a considerably low number of formalization of the economy, and people who have jobs that are secured by the Social Security and are recognized by the government. So you see in these tourist places many people who are not badged as tour guides, because the process is really, really it's criteria. So they put lots of selective process, a huge selective process for you to become authorized tour guide. But there are many people who are not officially legalized, and they are there trying to get some money and selling goods, selling souvenirs. So this is why I think it's difficult to number specifically how many people. But as for the last question, the museum is well known for being involved as one place for repatriation of African art. But it's really complicated. It's not that simple, because they are receiving all these nice works of art that were stolen and sometimes given in awkward circumstances, and sometimes were donated as gifts to European states and colonial governments, and they are now receiving these collections, not permanently, because the idea that not giving back, not doing the repatriation, is mostly because they don't have institutions, right? The assumption is the institutions are not good enough to receive these pieces, and they will just rot in the African context. And there they've built this huge museum with lots of resources, this world-class museum. And then they are receiving these pieces, but they don't own these pieces yet, because there are from pre-colonial concepts, contexts. So you can only name ethnic groups, and you can only identify a few information about it. So it's mostly this is the collection that is more impressive, the 19th century African art collection, but there are also pretty nice things from the Islam in the region, the presence of the Islam, and really important objects to contemporary art from the Senegalese government that has been purchasing and fomenting. So it's a really nice museum. It's worth the visit.
Thank you so much, Carla. I will try to make this quick so you can luxuriate in your success. I'm also drawn to this story of these young folks who are coming from the US, and in particular, the quote, "We leave home to be treated the same way here." And I also think about this title, this idea of implication and desire. I don't know if you've seen the movie Belly with DMX and Nas. Yeah, write it down.
Sure.
But for those in the room who have, there's also this idea, right, of Africa. No country also is ever named in the movie. It's just like Africa is this one thing. But the idea of Africa is this sort of promised land, right, the space of freedom for Black folks. And I'm wondering, in your conversations with visitors, especially those coming from countries where Blackness and brownness is not dominant, did they have hopes? Did they have particular expectations of what they would find in these places? And then was there any conversation around how those hopes kind of matched up or didn't with what they found being there? And again, I'm thinking about this quote where it seems like there was maybe some hope of like, we're going to be treated like we're the best. And then, oh no, it's still the same here. And so, yeah, was there anything you found in these conversations regarding that?
Oh, that's a really nice question. And thanks for the movie suggestion. And yes, before I got there, I was seeing that one of the biggest motivations scholars were listing and asking tourists why they are going to majority Black countries. And mostly this is one of the motivations, to feel like they are not a minority. So to look around and you're not the only Black person in the room. So this is why I read as a race thing once I heard it, because I said, it's familiar. This is like, I was expecting to find only Black people here and not be treated as if I were somebody suspicious, if I were doing something wrong. And I think it's not only in this example, but I found in others, as in the last example that I gave. So she just wanted to amuse herself, and it's a Muslim country, come on, right? I just wanted to meet people, party, and be Black, and it's not the Blackness that she was expecting. So it wasn't bad. She took a lot of advantage of people she met, and then she returned to the country later on. So, but the expectations about being in a place where you're not the minority, it may not be met completely, and you're not treated as an equal sometimes. Most times you're not, because you're not equal. So I think this is something that it's important to remark. Thank you.